Hello everybody, Ben Woodruff here with another Falconry video. Happy January 1st. I guess that depends on where you are in the world, but 2023, this is the first video of 2023. If you're new to my channel, I try to have a new video up every Monday. And this first video I wanted to do on what is the best bird species for you to use for your first bird. You're new to falconry, or always want to get into it, and you did. What's the best species to use? And it's kind of an interesting question, and there's not one right answer. So what I want to actually do instead is give you some principles, kind of 4 principles that I think are really good to determine the answer to that question. Now, I grew up in the United States. I grew up in the 1900s, and in falconry for us, we had to serve an apprenticeship, still do, but when I was getting into falconry, you could only have 1 of 2 birds. You could either have a red-tailed hawk, which is a very large, very powerful, sturdy, very forgiving hawk, boodio, buzzard, and they're very common. The other option they gave us was the American kestrel, which is incredibly small. It's a good bird, but highly delicate, and weight management has to be perfect, or else your kestrel can keel over dead on you. And those were our only 2 options. My understanding, talking to wildlife administrators from the 80s, was that maybe sort of the idea behind that was red-tailed hawks and American kestrels are both incredibly common in the United States. In just about every state, you can find them everywhere. So they're incredibly common. And the idea was, hey, you know what? This is a very highly regulated sport, but if some new falconry apprentice doesn't know what they're doing and they accidentally kill one of these birds through mistraining, mishandling, whatever, that the bird, it's not a loss to the wild population because we've got so many, they're a dime a dozen. That's my understanding from past administrators I talked to, was sort of part of the idea behind them. Common, available, and if something happens, it's not a terrible tragedy to a sensitive population. But it's interesting, there's might be wisdom in flying those species, depending on where you are and who you are, but there's also some challenges. An American kestrel is a very tiny, delicate bird, and if you train them wrong, and like I said, if your weight management's off, they could die easily. Now, here's an interesting thing they did. This was not a law, but this was at different times in my state, in Utah, sort of an unofficial policy, was rather than going and trapping a wild bird, because they said you had to trap a red-tailed hawk or a kestrel, you had to trap them. You could not get a captive bred one, you had to trap it. But there was sort of an odd exception, and that was, if it was springtime or summertime, there were wildlife rehabilitators that would often have kestrels that were brought in. And these were imprints that had just, maybe they were orphaned, or people had taken them as an interesting pet and realized, oh, this is illegal, give it to a rehabber. And the government would say, here is the phone number of a wildlife rehabilitator, go talk to them first and see if they have any red tails or any kestrels that you can take. If they don't, then go trap one. And it's really kind of interesting because birds from rehabilitators can have some very interesting complications that an apprentice might not be ready for. So I find it interesting that that was something that was being done that early. And now it's very different, the attitude. So what's the best species? Again, that's a complicated question. So I'll give you 4. My 4 principles are, sorry, I'm still getting over being sick. Kind of lost my voice, so I appreciate your patience with that. So your principles are the land, the quarry, the flight style, and the time commitment. So the first one, land, is what is your landscape? Are you in an area covered with forests? Are you in a very cold environment? Are you in a very open, are you in the prairie? Are you in the desert? These factors determine a lot of things. So for example, some species like big falcons, like a peregrine falcon, for example. Peregrine falcon is a bird that does best with a lot of space. It is traditionally flown in open country where it's allowed to circle high above you at thousands of feet. You flush up quarry, a pheasant, a duck, whatever, a grouse, and they dive down and knock it out of the sky. Or if they miss, maybe they do a tail chase. If you live in endless stretches of hardwood forests, probably shouldn't do a large falcon. So it's kind of cut and dry. So those kind of factors. Now, it's good to have a sponsor. In the United States, by law, you have to have a sponsor to mentor you during your first 2 years. They will help you kind of understand which birds are going to fit your landscape. And kind of going along with that, the second one is the quarry. What species do you have available for your bird hunt? I have a friend in another state where it's just wild pheasants everywhere, and he's very open country. Well, why fly a Merlin or a Kestrel? It's a great opportunity to fly a large falcon. Go get a prairie falcon. Go get a peregrine. Go get a gyr falcon. It's great, and that's what he's done, and it served well. Now, I have another friend here in Utah, John Griggs, who does the Falconry podcast with me. A lot of you know John, and you might have seen his channel, Falcon's Ledge. Well, John is a longwinger. He loves big falcons. That's his passion. But he's a smart man. And he moved to Arizona several years ago, and he got a large falcon and was flying it there, which large falcons can be flown in Arizona. But it's Harris Hawk country. There's Harris Hawks not everywhere, but there's Harris Hawks available, and they're rabbits to hunt everywhere for him. And so he said, well, I'm a longwinger, but I'm going to get a Harris Hawk and do something totally new to me. And he had incredible success. Had a great time doing it. And that was wise. Instead of trying to force a bird that wasn't really built for Arizona, instead he's like, hey, what's the perfect bird to hunt the quarry? There's a rule we say, and that is a falconer will always have the best success if you fly a bird native to your area and you hunt it on quarry that it would naturally hunt and quarry that is readily available in that area. So like my area, Cooper's hawk is a great bird to use because the Cooper's hawk is native and plentiful in my area. I use them to hunt quail, which are native and available to the area, and something that Cooper's hawks naturally hunt. So the quarry is a big determining factor. It not only what prey species lives in your area, but what are the numbers? Are rabbits rock bottom? Then maybe don't get normally they're high, but they've been rock bottom for years. Maybe don't get a rabbit hunting bird. Now the flight style is something you've got to know and what's going to work in your area. Again, falcons usually open area birds. Red-tailed hawks, people might be hunting them off the fist or letting them follow along. Accipiters like a goshawk or a Cooper's hawk usually flash and dash. You're just like, okay, you're just you're going out there, and if it's dense forest, that's okay. But the bigger point about flight style is, do you need telemetry? Now, in the old days, there was no such thing as telemetry. There was no radio telemetry. There was no GPS, and falconry bells were used instead. Now, we still use bells today, but we've kind of turned that role to find your bird is primarily telemetry. Now, that might be, I've got a falcon, and it dove and it chased a grouse for a couple miles, and I got to track it down. Or it might be, I flew a goshawk, and it only went 50 yards, but now it's in this dense brush, quietly sitting on whatever it caught, and it doesn't want to move, and you could step on the bird. So telemetry, really, if you can, every species should be flown with telemetry. But it's generally accepted that an American kestrel, a red-tailed hawk, and Harris hawk can be pretty safely flown without telemetry. Pretty much any other bird, you need telemetry. So beware, what is the flight style best suited for your region based off of the bird? And will that bird then fit your region? And do you need telemetry? Can you afford telemetry? Then maybe if you can't, maybe you shouldn't be flying a bird that requires telemetry, or you will lose your bird eventually. Now, the last principle is time commitment. What time do you have available? And know yourself. Be honest with yourself. Maybe you've never had an animal before. This is not a pet. This is an animal that requires daily weight management to the gram. Do you have that commitment level? You don't want to find out with a dead bird. You got to do it right, which is partly why in America we have a sponsorship program where a sponsor helps oversee you and helps you know the best choices. But your time commitment will help determine, and so you got to be honest with yourself. In the United States now, they have opened up what birds you can have. It's no longer just a kestrel or a red-tailed hawk. Most states offer a wide number of species you're allowed to fly. But a good sponsor knows, hey, this apprentice maybe could fly a goshawk. They're so excited and passionate and have the intense commitment to fly one right. Maybe this apprentice over here isn't ready for that level of intensity, but they could fly a Harris. This is something to be considered. So remember, again, those 4 things are: what is the landscape? What is the quarry available? What is the flight style of the bird you want to fly, and will it require telemetry? And what, honestly, is your time commitment and your willingness to put all in? The nice thing is, if you don't have the time commitment, you can be honest with yourself and say, wow, falconry is not for me, or falconry is not for me currently where I'm at in my life. So these are the principles I use when I don't know your region, I don't know you personally, but people ask, what's the best bird for me? Just remember those factors, and hopefully they can help you make your right decision. Again, sorry about having no voice, but simple video for the first video of the year. Hope you found it useful. If you haven't already, if you could hit subscribe to my channel, I really appreciate it. And as always, happy hawking.